All right. Well, welcome back to Audiophiles Anonymous Podcast episode. I don't know. Help me out, Signcraft. 4, episode number 4. So this is kind of a new episode, kind of a continuation of our conversation about flagships that we had last time. We called it like Flagships Part 1, but honestly, it's been like a month ago. So it's kind of like, this is Part 2, and this is more of a value-oriented conversation about and we can start talking about flagships and the value we think they bring to the table, but then, maybe we'll work our way down through some of the cheaper price ranges and talk about how we think value stacks up there. We've already, if you haven't checked it out yet, Signcraft and I, we did a couple of episodes ago, we did like price picks or headphone picks in a lot of different price categories. So I think we both felt that those were good value options for where they were at. So that might be something you want to check out too. We can link that in the description as well. So Sign, why don't you start off? Like, what do you value perspective? I don't know, maybe just thoughts around it to begin with, and then maybe talk about, you're a Susvara guy, so you could talk about maybe value there.
Oh yeah,
and we can talk about some of the other high end stuff that we've tried and where we think all that stuff stacks up value wise, and then maybe work our way down a little bit.
Yeah. Sounds good. I think we were talking last time a little bit about what's the purpose of flagships in the market, right? Because this is a very small, strata of headphone junkies that both have the interest and the willingness and the ability to spend the kind of money that a flagship, a true flagship headphone costs. I mean, these are usually north of, I don't know if our definition was like north of $2,000 or north of $2,500, or just at least the top of the line of a thing that is made by, a manufacturer.
Yeah. I mean, I think we were saying probably at least around 2,000, but then we talked about like the 800, the HD 800, which I'm using at 8XX right now, which I think is a wonderful value, but I'll save that for a little bit later. But the best thing a company makes just to show off what they can do.
Right. And really. So what's the point there, right? If you're only going to sell a handful of these, that's not necessarily good business, right? If you're strictly looking at unit economics and the cost of manufacturing, setting up tooling, a production line, quality assurance, dealing with return, it's not like on its face value a very good way to make money.
No.
But a lot of manufacturers rush into this space, and it's not that they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart, right? They are making money, and that's the point of sort of the cost to value ratio at this upper end. And it's the same thing if you look at, supercars or hypercars or whatever. It's law of diminishing returns, right? You're not getting a 100x better performance, out of a $1 million Ferrari than you are out of a, $10,000 Suzuki. You're falling very rapidly off that diminishing return cliff. But still, why do all these companies do this? And it's a chance to sort of to explore new spaces and to put new technologies into the market and to try to figure out what's next for them and their brand and the audience.
Well, and we're talking a lot of times too, we're talking from a consumer listener perspective too of what the value of these things are. But maybe that's the wrong way to think about flagships, honestly, because I've been talking with an amp designer lately a little bit, and he's got some new stuff coming out, and we've been talking about value, and we've been talking about just why different amps are made, and so I think too, it's hard to put a value on the learning experience of creating something that's like the pinnacle of what you can achieve, right? I think for a lot of these manufacturers, the flagships are passion projects more than anything, right? They want to know what's the absolute best they can make, and then they try to figure out how to market it later, right? But I think at the core though, it's really just I want to make the best. Yeah. And that, how do you put a value on that, really? I mean,
it's R&D, right? It's research and development. And that for every flagship we see, there are tons of other crazy ideas, sitting in a lab somewhere in the headquarters of that company that never see the light of day. Because, for one reason or another, they have some inherent performance flaw. They are undrivable by reasonable technology. They're hard to commercialize. I mean, that's the thing, too. A flagship actually has to leave the lab go in a nice velvet covered box and arrive at somebody's doorstep. Whereas like pure R&D never has to do that. So if you think of the strata from like what's possible to what consumers get, right? There's this whole other strata of stuff we'll never see, right? Unless
That's
maybe
true.
we get the behind the scenes tour.
That would be fun stuff to see.
Absolutely, right? And having been in product development, like I've recognized that's the catch, right? It's not like people come up with amazing technologies all the time, and usually the unlock for them is the commercialization of them, right? Like, can you actually make this a manufacturable product, or can you only make one of these, for $200,000 in a lab? Sure, it sounds amazing, but there's no audience for it, so it's not really going to move your business forward or create something that a consumer or a professional. I think that's the other side of this too, right? We're looking at this from like the consumer standpoint of audiophiles who are, listening at home or at work and just enjoying music. But, there's also a big cadre of people who need to listen to accurately reproduced audio as part of their job, whether they're in, film video or in, music or whatever. Like there's many times in which audio recreation at a very high and precise level is a tool for professionals.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point too. And that's an interesting thought though. And maybe, cause again, when you talk about monitoring, we've talked about this before, I think, where it's like, if you could just get the best sound, then all this high end stuff would sound the same, which isn't the case. And that always leaves me wondering about like the monitoring stuff as well and that kind of equipment, because again, it doesn't all sound the same, but I suppose it's just, again, different strokes for different folks and what they're looking for and what they need when they're reproducing, professional audio. So that's an interesting lens to look at it as well, though. So we've established, right, that these flagships are like the best that they can do and still kind of somewhat commercially market it somewhere else. So when it comes to thinking about like your Susvara versus, some of the other stuff that you have, how do you wrap your mind around that value wise, like justifying owning, a several $1,000 headphone and a chain to drive it? Like what's your thoughts around that? Because this is kind of like, I'm in a phase right now where I'm trying to like settle it, obviously not permanently, because none of us are capable of that, it seems like, but settle on what I think is kind of like my ceiling for what I think is a reasonable amount of money.
I think that's actually a great place to start from, right? Is like, what are you willing to have in this hobby at a given point? And hopefully people are less crazy than you and I in terms of how often they're swapping gear and how much gear they're keeping on hand at a given point. But, a lot of people in this hobby that I know follow the same path I did. They got interested in sort of maybe, their first pair of headphones or first pair of speakers that was sort of above the really consumer grade stuff. They started researching it. They plunked down something that seemed insane to them at the time, like $150. They got, a Bear Dynamic or whatever. They got something that was like definitely next level from like the over-the-ear Sonys they'd heard before and were like, whoa, and it sort of unlocked their brain, and then they just rushed down the rabbit hole and got more and more and more stuff and kept justifying a higher price tag to themselves and how much money they had in the system, and then they start selling and swapping stuff out to be able to get money back out of what they've got in it so they can try new things and so on and so forth, and hence the vicious cycle, or super fun cycle, depending on where you're at.
A little of both. Little of both.
But at some point, I think most of us step back and go, okay, let me add up everything in my rack or on my desk or in my, whatever. Let me look at the headphones I have hanging up. Just do some quick back of the napkin math, and you go, holy smokes. Like, that's a insert blank, a new lawnmower, a new motorcycle, a new trip to Paris. Like, that's
I just did that math myself, which is another reason why I wanted to have this conversation. I am proud of myself, though, that I did tell my wife what that number actually was.
Did you move the decimal point, or did you just?
No, I kept it legit. We both our eyes were both wide, and I said, maybe it's time to sell some things.
Well, that's good. That's very transparent of you. I have a don't ask, don't tell policy personally, although it's not hard to recognize that there's a problem here. But yeah, I think at some point, most folks are going to go like, what do I feel comfortable with? Like what feels right to me? and then optimize back down from there. Okay, if I can only have X dollars in my system, do I want one or more pairs of headphones? Okay, if that's the headphone or the headphones I'm committing to, then that'll inform the chain that I need in front of them to get the most out of them, and so on and so forth. Or, people have different ways of sort of rationalizing where they want the value within their chain. But setting a ceiling is certainly one useful tool in terms of like understanding value.
And I think for me, I've gone beyond, like, part of it is like I've gone beyond my ceiling. Like, I feel like, right? Like my audio gear significantly outvalued my vehicle, which seems, ludicrous. So, how
much time do you spend with your audio gear, and how much time do you spend in your vehicle?
Well, I spend way more time with my audio gear than vehicle when you put it like that. I only have to drive like 3 miles a day. So,
although your vehicle also has to keep your children safe in case of an accident.
That's
so.
true. But I guess where I'm at is I feel like I had kind of prices in mind for each piece of gear, and I think I went beyond that for every piece of gear, but part of that was just exploration. Right. I was like, well, I want to go beyond what I'm comfortable with just to see if I really think it's worth it.
Right.
And then I can make a decision. And now that I've kind of done that, I feel like, okay, I know where I want to be. And even if some of that higher end gear is maybe a little bit better performance wise, I feel like I can get what I want for less.
Yeah, the unknown unknowns will haunt you, right? So the fact that you've at least tasted a lot of things and tasted at the very high end level informs you to say, like, okay, I'm holding one pair of headphones. Like I have you recently lent me the HE1000 V2. I'm holding that in one hand, which is not an inexpensive. I mean, that's still flagship, and
that was my most expensive headphone. Yeah,
I'm holding that in one hand and the Sesfar in the other hand, which is 2x on an insanely expensive headphone already. Going like, how on earth can I justify this other headphone in this hand? And I think part of it for me is sort of that thing I asked you about. Well, how much time do you spend with it? Like, part of my justification is in this time, in this place, in this post-COVID or still COVID, pandemic world where I have a very young child, like, my options for how I spend my time and my money are limited. And so that's my justification. That's a very personal justification. That has very little to do with like value and more to do with like, okay, the time I'm listening, I want this experience. This is meaningful to me. It's my special thing to myself. And at some point that will not be the case. If I'm traveling more again, if I'm out in the world more again, like, that will probably seem much less valuable to me, and I will probably want that money back out of the system. But as we've talked about in buying and selling gear, if you can be thoughtful about what you get in for price-wise, and all my stuff's used, and if, you recognize you'll have some depreciation and whatnot, and the market's going to shift, I don't see it as like, I've spent that money and it's gone forever. I see it as like, I've spent that money. I'm continuing to rent the equipment as it devalues.
Yeah.
And eventually somebody in like a year, who's like getting to that point is going to be really happy to have a Sesfar at the price I'm going to be willing to get rid of it for.
Yeah, so not really an investment, but also not just like a total money sink where the money's gone either. Like, they still, everything has value, especially, if you take care of it and you preserve it and, you don't let your 2-year-old get a hold of it.
I know, there are risks. There are inherent risks. I always love people's posts who are like, no smoking, no kids, no pets, like, I don't eat meat. It's like whatever.
So I think those are all fantastic points to make, and I feel like, same for me is that I feel like too. What's kind of changed my thoughts here recently is I've got a couple of pieces of gear for very reasonable prices, and I think this is what I want. This is what I'm enjoying right now. And just honestly, like the HE1000, I'm like, I love that headphone, but I don't want to listen to it that much right now. So I'm like, I'll get that money back out of it. You know, it's not like they're going to be gone forever. If I want to buy another one down the road, I can.
Yep.
So that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it.
I think that's nice. It's very hard to let go sometimes in this hobby, especially when you're like kind of buying and selling on the used market like we are, because there's this sense of scarcity, and like that's often how you make the worst decisions. Like it's like, yes. I'll never get it, or I got this for such a great price, I'll never get it for that price again, or what if I actually decide I did want to listen more to it in a couple months just because I'm not into it right this second. And that does happen. There's headphones that I put up on a shelf for a while and then come back to and be like, I love this headphone. Why haven't I been listening to this more? But yeah, I did a pretty big sell-off of a lot of gear to focus on a single chain. And that was like my first decision about what I wanted to do with the money that I had in this hobby, was focus. Like that was the value creating I wanted to do. I wanted to sort of eke the most out of basically a single system. And that's why I've stuck with this as far as is like, I haven't heard anything that bests them.
Yeah.
Period. So it's like, if I'm going to have a single chain and really have fun optimizing that chain, the thing at the end of it has to be, in my mind, the best thing. So that I know as I'm tweaking, up the chain, I'm going to realize those results. But, if somebody came to me tomorrow and said like, look, whatever, you need money to do something else important. You can only have an X dollar system on your desk. Like, I don't think I'd be crushed. I think I'd enjoy the challenge of like trying to optimize into that system. I'm playing a different game right now, which is like, I still have a ceiling, right?
Yeah.
There are, $20,000 headphone amps. I'm not buying a $20,000 headphone amp. Like, I have an insane amount of money in this rack right now, but everyone has a limit at some point.
I'm going to go back to that. The enjoyment of trying to fit into a certain budget. And I think that's really one of the things that drives me and my interest in the hobby, honestly, is because I kind of have different like price points in my head. And I'm like, okay, what's the best $1,000 system I can build? What's the best $500 system I can build? What's the best, $200 system? And you can kind of just play around with like, well, if somebody was going to come to me and say they had $300 to spend, these are the options that I would lay out for them. And I kind of like just having that inventory of options in my head. And I think that is a lot of fun to think about, like high value, like price point systems. That's just something that I enjoy doing. And I think, right now I've got like the two pieces of gear that really made me kind of do a 180 from the HE1000. And again, not that I don't like the HE1000. I love that headphone, but I got these 8XXs and they were like $650, which I know sounds like a lot to some people still. And it is a lot for a set of headphones, but I'm like, what these can do for that amount of money with my $500 used Felix Audio Echo that I've got. And I'm like, it's great audio, and it's like almost under $1,000 for those two things.
That's great.
I'm going like, I don't think I can beat it. And I don't think I can justify owning more. Yeah. At this point, and that's my budget. That's where I want to be. I feel like for me, it's about like $500-$600 for every piece of gear in the chain is kind of where I'm like, that seems not too crazy to me. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm almost there. My DAC is still a little bit more than all that, but I'll experiment some more.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very reasonable price point to play in. I think if somebody said, could I build a system that I'd like genuinely love and not sort of like nitpick faults on a daily basis? Like if they said you have $300 to do it, I'd be like, maybe, I don't know. 500, probably like $1,000. I think you could build a kick-ass system for $1,000. Like after that, I do believe that the law of diminishing returns starts multiplying really fast, or unmultiplying. I don't know. You're the teacher. You tell me. But
yeah, I don't know. Dividing
quickly, right?
Factoring. I don't know.
Exactly. But yeah, I think, and there is sort of I think I've tried to draw that graph in my head. There's like a point where like, to make a thing for that amount of money, there's going to be so many corners cut that you're just not there yet, right? It's like you're like talking about, and it's not that there aren't good like $50 headphones for what they're built to do.
Yeah.
But when you're getting into this game, if you're listening to us talk about this, you're obviously you're already fallen off the wagon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's the point at that like $150 above mark on a pair of headphones where you start to get into the like mind blown territory of like, I didn't know things could sound like this. And then it keeps going for a while, but it does start to taper for me, probably around $500-$600. And then it's not that the graph isn't going up. It just starts to go up so much slower and even sort of falter. I feel like it almost flatlines, and then maybe it picks back up for me at the like really crazy high end stuff. But then you've also just got taste as such a factor at that point. I can't genuinely say a lot of that stuff is like better. It's almost just taste.
Well, and I think too, it's like whenever I really start to question it is when I kind of A/B stuff and I'm going, can I really hear a difference? Like, is it like I question myself? I'm not like instantly like, oh yeah, like that's okay.
I think that's a really good measure of value, right? If you switch from one DAC or one amp or one pair of headphones to another, you should go like, oh damn, like that's my opinion. Like, I want to hear that. If I don't hear that, then you haven't created value for me, no matter what the price delta is. Like, I want a difference. I want to hear something notable.
I do feel like there should be an asterisk there, though, in that a lot of times with some of this stuff, like the improvements are so nuanced that you do need to acclimate to them. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of times a sudden A/B isn't gonna let you see the whole picture. So I agree that you should be able to hear a difference, and like that should be a factor. But like, I was just, for instance, listening last night, and I'm given another 6 Series Sennheiser a chance. So I got an HD 600 that I picked up. That's like the only one I haven't heard yet. And I settled into it for a good hour, and by the time that hour was done, I could see its merits. You know what I mean? But I think too, like just speaking to like once you get to the $500-$600 range, how things are looking pretty good. I think with those lower value headphones, for me, they're just less consistent, right? Like you can listen to a Sundara or an HD 600 or something along those lines, right? And you'll say, that's good, that song's good, but then you'll hit one and you go, I don't know, that one's grating on me a little bit. Whereas just like I feel like as you move up in value, some of those rough edges get smoothed out a little bit more to where it's not as genre dependent necessarily or track to track dependent. Like you can just, or maybe that's just my piece of value is like I'm looking for a headphone where like I don't feel like it grates on me in a lot of scenarios.
I think that's an interesting point though, because I think that's an argument that a lot of people make to themselves about why they have multiple pairs of headphones, right? It's like, oh, this is like my jazz headphone. This is like my hard rock headphone. This one sounds awesome with like sort of more producer oriented music. And I think you're right that as you move up the chain, you will find less compromises. Will you still find one headphone that does everything
probably
equally good? Probably not. Or does everything to your taste, right? It's like, I don't want a flat, response with certain kinds of music. I want a heavy V shape, or but that's to my taste. That's a layer I'm putting on the original artist's intent or whatever.
So is it more valuable to have a $600 pair of headphones that's less compromising, or to have 3 $200 headphones that fit 3 different niches for you?
I don't know. I think that's totally personal, right? That's like how you like to listen. Yeah.
Yeah, totally personal way to think about it. What do you think? I mean, as far as going up in price on things and the value of different pieces in the chain, I mean, where do you feel like certain pieces of gear have more diminishing return than others? Amps, DACs, tube amps versus solid state. Do you have any thoughts on any of that stuff as far as it goes? I don't feel like I've really. I at first, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said DACs would have been, but I don't know. Now that my DAC is the most expensive thing in my chain, and I'm going, it matters.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
I'm with you. I think I used to kind of poo-poo the importance of a DAC a little bit, but I think that was also because I was listening to a lot of less expensive gear. Yeah, and I don't think that a lot of $300 pair of headphones and $200 little desktop amps are going to let you really unpack what a high quality DAC is offering.
That's an interesting thought right there. Because yeah, if you say you're using a set of $200 headphones, and you're using a $200 amp, and then you go buy $1,000 DAC,
yeah,
you might not even notice a difference.
That's why I think. That's why I look a little bit about what's the total spend for the system.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you were sort of saying like 500, 500, 500 is like one way to think about it. And I think that is probably at like $1,500 as a total system. That probably might be a good way to divide the spend. But if you're spending like, I don't know, $300, don't get a DAC. Like that's not a worthwhile part of your system at that point. And I don't know. I think you could play with the ratios of the total system expenditure depending on what you're at. But yeah, now that I've listened to some really, really high end DACs on some really good gear, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of night and day when you go between DACs and you're like, oh, that is having a huge influence on my listening experience. But huge, I don't know. I mean, not really.
Huge is relative.
Huge is relative.
I think, and that's maybe that has a perceived. I don't know. I'm thinking there's just kind of like, how do I want to put this? I don't know. It's not misinformation, but just the communication isn't always great between people like us that listen to tons of stuff, and we might use hyperbole to get a point across, you know, when the realities are not like, yeah, if you like we said, if we AB, you know, like a $300 DAC to $1,000 DAC, it might not be like night and day, but to us, we might say, well, if you really pay attention to it, the differences are pretty large, you know, but people are using huge, you know, destroys it, blah, blah, blah. And it's like
no.
Maybe we're setting the expectations a little too high for some of that stuff as well.
Yeah.
I know I feel like I've fallen into that trap before, at least, where like people have said, oh, you know, this is the greatest thing or blah, blah, blah. And then I listen to it and it's just like, it was just typed too much.
Yeah.
You know?
You're like, well, that was a little better. I'm not going to argue with you there.
Yeah,
it was
I'm like,
a little better.
Yeah, it's better, maybe. I think. I don't know.
I think, though, it's interesting, you know, you've ended up with the DAC as one of the most expensive things in your chain, and maybe the thing I'm reading between the lines, it seems like you're maybe the most reluctant to downgrade from, or, you know, maybe you'll find something that you love, but I think...
just haven't found another one that I like as much, you know, whereas like with the amps and stuff, like I have a more expensive amp, and then I got this, you know, this cheaper tube amp, and plus I'm starting to go down the tube rabbit hole here, which is a fun rabbit hole, but also
welcome to my world.
Yeah, also you know, different as far as just expectations and things go with dealing with that gear, but I think I haven't, like, so the Socra's 2541 is the DAC that I have now, you know, like a $1,200 DAC or something like that, right? And I love it, you know, and I don't want to have a $1,200 DAC, but I'm like, if I'm going to go back down in price, I got to find something that I like as much, and I haven't.
Here's the thing that I think is interesting about where you've ended up, right, is that, and I feel sort of similarly, if I were going to downgrade a bunch of my equipment, the DAC might be one of the last things I downgrade, because having tried a bunch of them and understanding what they do to the chain, it's like, that's the part, like, that's really a lot of where the magic happens, is like, how are you turning those ones and zeros into audio signal? And you can't, like, if you don't like that, everything that comes after it is going to suffer from it. And again, if you're in like gear where it's like you're not playing in those nuances, then it kind of doesn't matter. But knowing that I might not love my downgrade, or I might end up going up in other places, I don't know. Right. I feel like that's probably like I'd keep a really good DAC, and then I'd probably my you know, headphones and incredibly powerful amp to drive them would go, and that would free up a ton of money. And, you know, there's a lot of amps I've liked that are much cheaper, a lot of headphones I've liked that are much cheaper, and that's probably where I'd actually end up. So, yeah, DACs.
Going back, plus I feel like amps and headphones too have a lot of flavor, right? So there's a lot more room for preference there. A DAC, I don't feel like is so much like the flavor. It really is more of a technical thing at the DAC level. Do you think, or maybe I'm not?
I don't know. I feel like there's definitely DACs that add flavor, usually not in a great way. Like, I'd like a somewhat even-keeled response. But, yeah, I don't know, maybe flavor is sort of the loaded word here, because like really good R2R ladder DACs that I've tried have just the most beautiful decay, right? They're just, notes stretch out, they end so naturally, they can come in with impact, and that leading edge can be well defined, but it doesn't feel like false or propped up. There's space between things because there's space between them in the recording, not because an algorithm is saying like, oh, people think things sound more high end when I take it apart and like add gaps in between. Like there's just, I don't know.
See,
it's like,
me,
it's very like
me,
hard
though,
to take that apart.
I don't know. To me, I don't feel like that's really flavor, though. To me, I feel like that's just like capturing the recording properly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Whereas like a tube amp, that's some flavor, right? Like you're adding flavor there to it. And headphones, they have their own little flavor they're adding to it. But like for me, the DAC is like, again, like you're talking about, if you don't have it there, nothing after that can create it.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I do agree with you. I think if we're thinking about flavor in terms of like, oh, a headphone is V-shaped or U-shaped or has a flat response or whatnot, or emphasizes this or that. Yeah, hopefully good quality DACs aren't adding too much of their own tuning, right? Their own emphasis on anything. They're going to somewhat, right? It's like it's a process. You're converting
it has to.
Data to waveform. So it's like it's going to happen a little bit. But yeah, I'm with you. But still, there's something that like two DACs at similar price points using similar technologies, one I'll still like more than the other. For some reasons. For some reason.
I agree. It
so
all
there's
matters.
Preference. Maybe there's less flavor.
It all matters to a certain extent, right? Yeah. Like I don't feel like there's any part of the chain where you can be like, oh, just get whatever. It's not gonna matter. I feel like it's all, and again, even like all the $100 to $200 THX amps. Mm-hmm. They don't all sound exactly the same. They just don't.
No, they really don't.
And so, I mean, I just think, again, my personal way to do things in this hobby is I almost always have to have at least two of one thing. So I can try them, and then I can just pick one, and then I don't question it as much. Or at least it buys me some time until I start questioning it again. Anyway.
That is a good way to think about value, is like whether you have the means or not to get your hands on multiple of a thing, like find, like people in this community are super friendly. Like people like lend me gear, not because I do reviews, but because they're nice and I lend, so it's like there's meetups, there's a lot of opportunities to try stuff. And I think that's like, people may feel a little siloed in this hobby, that like, oh, they're like in their home office or their bedroom or whatever, like on YouTube looking at this stuff. And they're just like, I'm never going to get to try that. And you get all this FOMO. I'd say, I don't know. I would try to get over that hump. I think there are typically in most major metros, there's good meetups, there's good communities, there's Facebook groups, there's obviously, HeadFi and all the other communities. Like reach out to people, like do a swap, do a loan, rent something from somebody, but try stuff, because that's the way to understand where you're going to draw your line on value.
And get involved and be willing to share as well, right? Like you can't just come in as a stranger and be like, "Hey, somebody loaned me this $1,000 set of headphones." Like nobody's going to go for that. But if if you're working with people, if you're communicating with people, doing a little bit of trading, there's several people anymore that I just trade with. We don't even sell to each other, just hey, you send me this, I'll send you this. We'll swap back in a couple of weeks, whatever. And that's, again, for me, this hobby, and I may have mentioned this at some point in the past, but I always go back to this American Pickers episode where one of the guys was like, the goal is to play with all the toys in the world, not to own all the toys in the world. And that's how I, approach this hobby. And that's why I think like, any of the headphones that I have on hand right now, it's not that those are the headphones I want. It's just that's what I'm playing with right now.
Yeah.
And then I'll sell them or trade them so I can play with something else.
Well, so how do you reconcile that with sort of this idea of narrowing down the collection, narrowing down to stuff that really has good value for dollar in your mind?
Yeah, I think, well, for me, it's like I have my best stuff that I like. Like, this is what I'm really enjoying. This is what, like, I'm comparing against. And then, so I kind of, in my head, I guess I have, like front runners. Mm-hmm. And then it's like they're there until something comes in and overtakes them. Whether it overtakes them because they're just better or because they're a better value in my mind, or because my mood changes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's stuff like I said, 8XX is just my favorite headphone right now. Like, I'm just really enjoying it in all sorts of situations, right? So in my head, I'm going, this is the headphone that I just want to listen to right now. So It doesn't make sense for me to keep another set of $2,000 headphones if I have a $650 set that I want to listen to.
Yeah.
And, but I reviewed an 800S a couple of months ago, and I was like,
Right.
At the time, I was like, I don't know, it wasn't doing it for me. So whether it's my preferences changed, my source gear has changed, whether it's just because I bought this set for so cheap in my mind, that's, to me, I can just enjoy things more if I'm like, I know I got a good deal on it. And then I'm like, I'm not sitting here going, oh, I got too much money invested in that. I'm not listening to it enough. Yeah. It takes some of those nitpicks off my brain.
Yeah. Well, we probably touched on this before, but it's like this should bring you joy, right? This should bring you closer to the music and be, sure, there's the technical side. It's fun to swap things and hear the differences and all that. But at the end of the day, this entire hobby should be bringing you joy. And if you're like stressing out because you've got too much money in your gear, or you got to put something on that you don't want to put on because you feel like you should like it because you spent a bunch of money on it. Like, those are all like, you got to check yourself on that stuff. Like,
time to make a change.
Time to make a change. Yeah.
Time to make a change.
We all bought stuff we don't end up liking. We've all followed some hype train that led us down the wrong path. It's like, that stuff happens, but like, and moods change, whatever, if you don't sit down to listen and go like, I love that piece. I love this piece. This sounds great. I'm super happy with the sound. Like, if you got other things nagging you and freaking you out about it, it's just not worth it. It's not.
Yeah, it's not. You're right. And that's probably the biggest lesson, really, for all of it, honestly, is if you got too many things nagging at you, make a change. No, There's no rules, right? There's no rules to it.
There's no rules, and I think that's one of the big problems with this hobby is people act like there's rules. Oh, you didn't like that headphone? Like, you're wrong. It's like, you didn't like that. Yeah. You don't think that amp is the best pairing with that thing? You're wrong. Like, you haven't actually heard this.
Most money on a DAC? That's dumb. Yeah, no, there's no rules.
There's no rules. Don't believe anyone that says you are enjoying this. You're wrong. Like, that's never the case. The only way to be right in this hobby is to be listening to something that's bringing you joy. So it doesn't matter if it's terribly inaccurate, has a wacky sound signature. If it speaks to you, then it's your jam. Like, great, value driven. Like, and some things, like, you paid full retail for a thing, but it makes you super happy. Great. Like, no rules. Like, whatever makes you happy at the end of the day, and you can afford without going into credit card debt, I would say is a reasonable place to be.
That's it. I think we end it there. That's perfect.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Who knows when the next one will be? Hopefully we'll try to do one a little bit sooner next time around, but we got stuff going on too. So we'll just do it as we can kind of think up fun ideas for conversations, I think.
Yeah, and if you have any ideas, very much welcome. Got some nice comments back last time that were very helpful and encouraging and good questions. So these do get posted to YouTube, but they're also available as just pure audio podcasts if that's easier for you. To listen to something as you commute or whatnot. So we'll put links for all that stuff in the description.
Yeah. And feel free to add to the discussion, right? If you have some thoughts on value or how you think about it or what great pieces of gear you think are, excellent values, drop all that stuff in comments or shoot us an email and share those thoughts and maybe we'll talk about them next time around, something like that.
Yep. Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See ya.